I was 23 years old when I stopped being nobody. I remember the exact feeling of that night. The collar of my dress shirt was too tight. The air inside the Geneva embassy smelled like expensive food and nervous people. And I was carrying a tray of drinks I was barely qualified to hold. The Cathari had arrived on Earth 4 years before that evening, and nobody had quite gotten used to them yet. They were tall, luminescent, and carried themselves the way ancient mountains carry themselves, like they had been there long before you, and fully expected to be there long after. They found humans curious, the way you find a strange bird curious. Interesting for a moment, easy to forget. I was not supposed to be at that gala. I was a junior attaché, which was a polite word for someone who filed papers and refilled coffee and pretended to understand conversations happening 3 levels above his pay grade. But one of the senior liaisons had gotten sick, and I had been the only one available. And so there I was, holding a silver tray, trying not to make eye contact with a 7-foot-tall alien diplomat who could probably feel my heartbeat through the floor. Princess Aelvasha was standing near the far window when the charge went off. It was not a large explosion. That was the terrifying thing about it. It was small, precise, and designed by someone who understood exactly where she would be standing during the ceremonial address. A shaped charge, hidden inside a gift. A hollow human sculpture that someone had presented to the delegation 3 days earlier. Our own art, turned into a weapon. I have thought about that detail many times over the years. Whoever built that device knew enough about human culture to exploit it, and enough about Cathari ceremony to predict her location to within a meter. That was not a random crime. That was patience. The blast threw me sideways. I hit the floor and tasted blood, and for a moment, all I could hear was a high ringing sound and the distant noise of people shouting. When my vision cleared, I saw her. Aelvasha was on the ground, and she was going dark. Cathari do not bleed the way we do. They do not scream. When their bodies go into shock, their bioluminescence, the soft light that runs under their skin like veins of moonlight, begins to fade. It dims slowly, like a lamp losing power. From across the room, in the chaos, she looked like a broken decoration. Nobody else realized she was dying because dying, for her, looked like switching off. I realized it because I had spent the previous 2 years reading every field report, every medical brief, every cultural document I could get access to, because that was the kind of anxious, obsessive thing I did when I wanted to feel prepared for a job I was not sure I deserved. I crossed the room. I do not remember deciding to. I remember being on the floor, and then I remember being beside her, and then I remember pulling her toward the emergency exit, while 2 of my ribs ground against each other, in a way that made the world go briefly white. She was heavier than she looked. Most things worth carrying are. I got her out. She survived. I spent 6 weeks in a hospital with 2 broken ribs and 3rd-degree burns on my left forearm, and the Cathari High Court sent exactly one message to the Earth government about the entire incident. The message said, "The debt is noted." 4 words. The human diplomats were furious. My supervisor told me this was, in fact, the highest honor the Cathari could offer a non-citizen, and I should feel grateful. I tried to feel grateful. Mostly, I felt like my arm was on fire. Before Aelvasha left for her homeworld, she did one other thing. She asked for my name to be recorded in the Cathari Ledger of Obligations, their oldest and most sacred legal document, a living record of debts between individuals, families, and species. She called me her anchor. I did not fully understand what that word meant. I would spend 15 years learning. The investigation into the attack eventually pointed toward a human group called the Sovereignty Compact, a fringe organization that believed the Cathari were quietly reshaping Earth's political systems to benefit themselves. The assassin was never caught. The money behind the attack was never fully traced. The file went cold, and the world moved on, and I went back to work. But I was different after that night. Something had shifted. I could feel it the way you feel, a change in weather before it arrives. Over the years that followed, I stopped being a junior anything. The Cathari embassy quietly marked me as someone worth watching, and I was reassigned, slowly, to stranger and more difficult postings. I spent 3 years on their orbital station above Earth, learning their language, not the trade tongue that human diplomats used in formal meetings, but Vethal, the old language, the one they used with family and in private. I learned it the same way I had learned everything else important in my life, obsessively, late at night, long after anyone else would have given up. I spent 3 years on the Kethari frontier, in a region called the Reach, where 3 species were competing for resources around a dead star. I was officially an observer. I observed things that changed how I understood the word survival. I came back to Earth. I consulted. I advised. I wrote reports that were read by people who used them to write other reports. I drank too much for 2 years, and then I stopped. I worked on one classified project involving a pathogen threat to the Kethari noble bloodlines that I am still not fully permitted to discuss. 4 people know what I contributed to that. 3 of them are not human. By the time I was 38 years old, I lived alone in a small apartment in Nairobi. I had a bad left knee, and I had not spoken to Alavasha in 15 years. She had become Princess Regent after her father's illness. I had become the kind of person that governments called when normal solutions had already failed. I thought the chapter that began in Geneva had long since closed. Then my communications terminal lit up at 3 in the morning, with a Kethari royal cipher. The message was in Vethal, Old Tongue. That was the first sign that something was very wrong, because official messages never came in Vethal. It was from Seveth, Ailvasha's guard commander, a soldier I had met once, briefly, who had looked at me the way experienced people look at well-meaning amateurs. The message was short. The Princess Regent needed her anchor. She had 3 days. I should come alone and trust no one carrying compact colors. I was on a private shuttle within 4 hours. During the journey, I pieced together what had happened. Ailvasha had been poisoned at a diplomatic summit 3 weeks earlier. The method was sophisticated enough that I had to read the technical details twice before I believed them. It was not a traditional weapon. It was a biological compound, synthesized using human pharmaceutical methods, designed specifically to attack Kethari physiology in a way that their own medical community did not recognize. It looked, to Kethari doctors, like a natural illness. It was not natural. It was engineered, and it was built from our science, human science, which meant that the only person likely to identify its mechanism and know how to interrupt it was someone who understood both worlds. That was why she needed me. Not because I was a hero. Because I was an accident of history who had spent 15 years becoming exactly the right kind of strange. When I landed on Velshari, Seveth met me personally. He did not waste time on pleasantness. He led me through a palace in quiet lockdown, guards at every corridor, no non-essential personnel anywhere, and into Alvasha's private chambers. She was lying in a reclining chair surrounded by her medical staff, and she was dimming the way I had seen her dim once before. Slower this time, more like a tide going out than a lamp losing power. But the same silence, the same withdrawal of light. She looked at me when I entered the room. "In Vethal," she said, "you came." I said, "You have a debt ledger. I have a scar. We are still even." I spent the next 12 hours working alongside her medical team. I am not a physician. I want to be clear about that. But I understood the architecture of what had been done to her, because I had spent years reading classified threat assessments about weapons the compact was known to favor. The compound was attacking the nervous system pathway that regulated her bioluminescence, which in Kethari physiology is not decorative. It is functional. Switch it off completely, and the organism does not survive. The counter-process existed. A chelation protocol, a detox mechanism developed in human medicine, could interrupt the compound's binding sequence, but it required a specific reagent that the Kethari did not stock. I knew where it was. It was stored in a pharmaceutical cache on a trading station called Vesh, 40 hours away, partially administered by a compact-affiliated shipping company. The people who had poisoned her controlled the warehouse where her cure was sitting. Seveth offered soldiers. I told him that Kethari soldiers boarding a human station would give the compact exactly the story they wanted: alien aggression, human victimhood, political cover. It had to be a person who looked like the people running the station. It had to be me. I went alone. I used credentials that were technically still valid from an audit role I had held years earlier. I walked through a busy, underfunded station full of people just trying to finish their shifts, past 2 layers of compact management, and into a storage facility that was not expecting a visitor. I almost made it out clean. Instead, a doctor I had worked with years earlier, a woman named Yara Solis, someone I had not seen since the pathogen crisis, spotted me near the docking bay. She looked at what I was carrying. She looked at my face. She said quietly, "What are you doing?" And it was not a question. I told her everything. I told her fast, in the plain language of someone who does not have time for anything except the truth. She stood very still while I spoke. Then she helped me reach my shuttle without being stopped. I have owed her ever since. She knew that when she made the choice. I returned to Velshari with 11 hours remaining. The treatment took 6 hours. It was not dramatic. It was chemistry and silence, and watching monitors while trying to be useful without being in the way. At the 4th hour, the light under Aelvasha's skin began to stabilize. At the 6th hour, she opened her eyes, and the glow in them was steady and even. Seveth, who had stood in the corner of the room without moving for the entire 6 hours, exhaled once. For a Kethari warrior, that is close to tears. When the medical staff gave us space, Aelvasha and I spoke in Vethal for a long time. She asked why I had learned the old language. I said that it always seemed important to understand people the way they understood themselves, not just the way they wanted to be understood to outsiders. She asked if I had been afraid on the station. I said yes, the whole time, without stopping. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That is the thing we have never fully understood about your species. You are afraid, and you continue anyway. We find it very strange." I said, "We find it strange too. We do it anyway." She recorded something new in the ledger of obligations when she recovered. Not a debt this time. Something rarer in their legal tradition. A recognition. A permanent notation that says, in the formal language of Kethari law, "This one is ours, and we are theirs," and that fact does not expire. Seveth sent me a separate message, written in rough trade tongue, privately. "You are still a soft creature. But you are a useful soft creature. Do not die." I printed that message and put it on my wall. It is still there. The Compact's network began to unravel, once the evidence was in front of a joint tribunal. It took years. It was ugly. Some people called me a traitor. Others called me something else. I tried not to spend too much time listening to either. I went home to Nairobi. My knee still ached. My apartment was exactly as I had left it. Yara Solis sent me a message saying she had taken a posting at a new joint medical research station, that the work was interesting, and that she owed me nothing, while I owed her considerably. She was right about both. I have thought a lot, in the years since, about what any of it means. I am not a soldier. I am not a diplomat in any official sense. I am one person, with a scar on his arm, and a language in his memory, that almost no other human speaks. But here is what I know. At 38 years old, after everything, the galaxy is full of complicated situations, and people willing to do terrible things for power, and most of those situations do not need the strongest person in the room. They need the right one, the one who learned the right language, who read the right reports at the right hour, who walked through the right door because there was no one else left to do it. Humans are afraid and we do it anyway. Apparently, that is enough to change things. Even when it starts with carrying a tray at the wrong moment, in the wrong room, on the right night.